Okay, in the last video we created a simple form that was basically to recreate this top part of the manual form that you can see in front of you. I was only interested in this simple part of it, which is a one record display. I stopped when we had just one or two fields just to show you how to create it, and I showed you how to use the form design and form wizard. Just to have a look at the design view of it now, I've just altered this and I've pulled all the other fields in, so you can clearly see that this is beginning to have a look not too dissimilar. The layout is the same, so that's the main thing, that the positions of everything is virtually the same. The only difference being name has become first name, last name. The address has been separated into constituent parts, but the general location of the data is the same. Now the thing to do is to pull in the lesson information into here. Let's just see how this works, by the way. Want to have a look at some of the properties before we move on, just to tidy this form up a little bit. But you can see that the data's there, and what I have down here at the bottom are a series of buttons for moving through the data and back through the data. This bar allows me to select the entire record that I want to deal with and everything else. We'll leave that at the moment. We're pulling this new form, and what we're going to do is at the bottom here, notice I'm grabbing not the underside of this, because if I do that and pull that down, that creates a footer, but the top of the bar, which if I pull down allows the detail side to be a bit wider and give myself some blank space at the bottom here. I can't do the same here, there's nothing here, but if I go to there, that will produce the header that I can work with. So there's lots of little areas I can work with. What I'm going to do very, very simply is create a subform. That's what these things are called, subform, that sits in the middle here. And the relationship is this learner to the lesson. So what I'm going to do is click on lesson, pull and drop that into there. And Access starts up a little wizard. This is the subform wizard, and it says, do I want to define my own relationship, or can I just simply choose from the list? And the system's actually identified that there is a relationship that already exists. It knows that because of the relationship we created earlier. It knows that TBL lesson for each record in TBL learner form a relationship. So what we'll do is use learner ID to identify which learner had which lessons, and it just defines it at the bottom there. Have a check, as long as that fits with what you think it's implying, click on next, and then all I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to change this to S from, so I know it's a subform, go to the end and remove the word subform and click finish. The system goes off and it creates a subform. Now it's given me a little label there, and I'm just going to get rid of that label because I'm not going to need it. I'm going to pull this into position, and I'm going to widen this to fit the data I want. Let's have a look at how this is going to look initially. So you can see I'm looking at Datasheet View, and there's one lesson that Mickey Mouse has already taken, and I've got another row here, but this is Datasheet View. It's horrible and everything else. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back and I'm going to click on properties, which I've already got up. And do notice there's a difference with subforms and normal forms. I said to you last time that it starts off with the form being active, and therefore the property sheet tells you about the whole form. With a subform, the first click will take you to the relationship between the form and the subform. So this will tell you about that relationship. That's useful to remember, particularly when we come to do some tidying up of the way it looks. But I'm going to look at the form. And if I look at the form and I go to format, I can see that the default view is the datasheet view. So I'm going to change that. Single form will show a single record, but I want this to show all the lessons for this individual. So I'm going to go to continuous forms. I'm now going to simply run this form, and it doesn't seem to have changed, but the scroll bar is much longer. And I notice there's another record there. And what's happened is it's kept the layout, but it's created a multiple layout look, one underneath the other. What we've got to do is tidy this up a bit, and the best way of doing this, first of all, I don't need lesson ID, so let's get rid of that. I need to get rid of the labels. They're going to cause me some problems here, so the simplest thing I can do is get rid of the labels. I'm going to move lesson date into position and narrow it down. Lesson time, Maybe narrow that down a little bit. Lesson length. And price, which I'm definitely going to lessen in size. That's lesson rather than lesson. Even put the tick box in there to show if they've paid or not. I'm just going to widen that. The rest of them I would normally put into position, but at the moment I'm just going to delete them. I don't need them there. And the only thing I'm going to then do, first of all, is widen this box so I can see what I'm doing. And this is where this yellow boundary comes in useful. Because if I click on the outer edge, I can already resize. That means that I can then go to here and grab and pull this up. So it seems that I've produced a much smaller form, but if I now click on view, I can actually see that I'm beginning to get something that looks actually reasonable. It's beginning to work. I can put a tick in. That's going to work. So if I come off of here, by the way, the tick, I just ticked that and it's remembered that tick. So it does know that. There are certain other things I might not want. I may not want them to be able to move through the records. It makes no sense in this view. So this is where this properties really comes into its own. I'm going to click on the form. So remember, boundary click, then main click. I'm going to go over to this side of the system, over to the property sheet. And I don't want that thing at the bottom. And that happens to be the record selector. So I'm going to say no to that. Navigation button, sorry, the record selector is not, that's the bar down the side, don't want it anyway. And navigation buttons are the ones at the bottom, so I'm going to say no to that. Click on view and you'll notice that I've still got them showing. No, I haven't, they've gone there. This is the record selector for the form, but on the subform it's not there and I haven't got the buttons along the bottom here. If I go through more of these options, I can see that I could have scroll bars. Well, that does make sense if I've got lots and lots of lessons, but I'm never going to want to slide left to right. That would be a horrible form, badly designed. So I'm going to change that to vertical only. Then this one won't be available even if I have enough records to go all down the page. And that's ideal. The dividing line, well, if we go back to the view and if I go to create something new in there, so let's say 21st, and I'm going to say 1500, and it was 1 hour long and it was £25 and they haven't paid yet. Then what normally happens is if I go there, we've got this dividing system between them. If you don't want it, say no. Now that hasn't changed this grey boundary because that's to do with the records, but the dividing line should come between these two. If you don't want it, if something appears that you don't want, then remove it. Of course, I've just removed it off the wrong record, which was a silly thing. I've got to remember, I've got to go back to the form here, which might be the reason. Dividing line's still set to no anyway. Keep going up, navigation buttons we said no. Also going down, control box, well actually that's something we don't want to see. This is the control box up the top here. So I should, on a normal form, be able to choose menus off of here. I've got a tabbed system here, but later on I'm going to show you how to turn these into windows. And with a tab version is not something you're going to see a lot of. But you do have things like these drop downs. That's not going to control this one. But things like this will not be able to appear on your form. You want to restrict what anyone can do. So you really want to go through your form and switch everything off before you go around switching it all back on again. So I'm going to say, I've got record selector, I'm going to go down and say control box, no. Close button, no. Min max button, no. So I'm going to switch all these off. Movable, can I move the box inside the form? No. If I go upwards, I have a border. Now I don't want a border on here, so I'm going to set this to none. But you can still see a border running here. And that's not the border it's talking about. It's talking about an inner border that can appear. What this one's talking about is if I click on the very edge and format, I can see that it's got border style solid. So I set that to transparent. So this yellow line, the relationship between the form and the subform is defined by that yellow line. So again, if I view that, now it hasn't got this list. and going through more of the formatting. So going through, do I want them, when I'm running this, it allows the user to actually say, well, I want layout view, or I want datasheet view, and I want to stop all those views. So I'm going to go back to here, and I'm going to say no to layout view, no to datasheet view. So I've gone through switching everything off. Interestingly enough, I have the same options on the main form, and in this case I'm going to say no, I only want the form view, so I don't want datasheet, don't want pivot table, don't want pivot chart, don't want layout. Keep going down through these. Auto center senses it in the page. Auto resize means it will go back to normal size once closed. Fit to screen means it will dimension it correctly to the screen. Dialog's fine, but no record selector, no navigation button, no dividing line. In this case, this form will only ever show one person, so no scroll bars, no control box, no close button, no min-max. So I'm really cutting down what someone can do. And when I do that, this is what the form's beginning to look like. Here's my subform, that's working nicely, and here's my data at the top. The only thing else I really want to do is bring in labels into here. That's easy enough. All I do is pull that down and then use the toolbars up here. Using the little a, I can pull this in and I can put date. I'm going to pull that down a little bit further. And then what you would do is you'd make this exactly the same length as the box, and you might center the text and everything else. I might put at the top here the word lesson. Why? Well, because that's what the original form showed me. So I tried to recreate this as much as possible. When I came to view this, the labels would appear in there, and that would make it very clear what I'm looking at. So that's one thing. It's worth noting here that the boundary, the repeating data, is always in detail. The form header and the form footer don't repeat. It's only this section that repeats each time. So when I click on that, there it appears. That's one way of creating a subform, and it's a good way of creating a subform in an existing form. I'm just going to, oops, of course I switched off those buttons, so I can't use them. What I'm going to do is close this down and save both forms. There you go. What I'm now going to do is show you how you could use the form wizard to do virtually the same thing. This time I'm going to take the TBO learner. I'm going to take everything across. Now I'm going to go straight up to the top again and take TBO lesson. Notice how these have stayed in the selected. I've got the new fields. If you're talking about a relationship between two tables that have got a linking table, you also need to include the linking table in this list. So I'm going to pull this all across. Next. And the system's saying, well, do you want this by learner? So that will be at the top, and that's a one-to-many relationship. Or do you want this via lesson, which is looking the other way, which we know is a many-to-one relationship. So one lesson can only have one learner. We want the learner at the top, lesson at the bottom, and form with subforms. A linked form gives you a button to click, which will open up a new form. We'll look at that later on. Decide how you want your subform to look. I'm going to have that as tabular. Decide on the names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this from and put 2 on the end just to make sure there's a difference. And S from, go to the end and put 2 on there. And I'm simply going to open this form to view it. And you can see that though the layout's different and there's still fields on there like learner ID that shouldn't be there, it's actually done virtually the same thing. So in this case I could have used the form wizard to create the same thing, and then pull it around and change it. The main thing here is to remember this property sheet and work out what each one does. Even going through, writing it down, saying right, this is what this does, testing it and trying it out. It's not a huge problem for that. It's really nice. Now the only other thing I want to change here is I don't like the fact that I've got this tabbed layout. Again, this is something Microsoft introduced and I personally don't like it. So what I'm going to do is close that down. I'm going to go to File, Options, Current Database, just near the top is display status bar document window options. I've got it tabbed. I'm going to change it to overlapping. Overlapping windows, click on OK, and it warns me that I must close and reopen. That's fine. So at the moment, if I open my form, it looks like this. What I'm going to do is close it, reopen my database, and now open my form. And now I have a form that I prefer the look of. I prefer the layout of that. It's beginning to already look as I want it to be. Hopefully that's been helpful.